Students, thank you for joining us today for Future Triton Week. Future Triton Week is a multi-day webinar series designed to assist you, prospective undergraduate applicants, with the UC admissions process. Over the next few days, you'll learn more about the UC application, writing responses for the personal insight questions, the UC San Diego College system, as well as have an opportunity for a question and answer with our knowledgeable admissions officers. It's a fun-filled week, and we are thrilled that you are here virtually with us. My name is Timothy Borch, and I work as the Assistant Director for Transfer Student Services in the Office of Admissions. Next slide. I'd like to start by sharing that this webinar is being recorded. Additionally, through Zoom, please utilize the Q&A feature to submit questions that you have. We encourage you to submit your questions anonymously, as this is a public-facing site, and we will do our best to answer questions, as many questions as possible. In addition, closed caption is available via the transcript icon at the bottom of your screen. Again, this is the UC application walkthrough for transfer applicants, and we have two amazing admissions officers who are going to dive deep into the UC application today. They will share more information about the application timeline, navigating the application, entering coursework, selecting majors, and much more. There is a lot to cover when it comes to the UC application. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Taylor on the screen, and she is going to take us through the next step. Thanks, Taylor.
Awesome. Thank you, Timothy, for the lovely introduction. Hello, everyone. I've just introduced myself. My name is Taylor, and I am an admissions officer with UC San Diego. For all of you who are up in the San Jose area, I am the admissions officer who specifically works with De Anza, Foothill, Mission, West Valley, San Jose City College, and Evergreen Valley College. So if any of you are currently attending those schools, hello, I am your admissions officer. But as Timothy mentioned, we do have a lot to talk about today. So let's go ahead and dive on into our next slide. So we first just want to start by going over the UC application timeline. So let's go over the basics of the timeline. August 1st is when the application opens up. So it has already been opened up. I still can't believe it's November 1st, but it's been opened up for what, 3 months now. And November 1st is going to be the first official day that you can begin submitting your application. So technically today you can start submitting your app. However, do keep in mind, none of the UCs are on early action or early decision, and there really is no advantage to submitting your application earlier in November. So do not feel pressured to get your application in on November 1st. Make sure you're giving yourself enough time to double, if not triple, check over, make sure all your courses are entered correctly, make sure that you're happy with your PIQ responses, all that good stuff before you submit your app. Again, there's no advantage to submitting it early in November, but on the flip side, we also don't want you waiting until November 29th or 30th to start your application, because that's not going to be a fun situation for you as well. Now, one deadline that's not mentioned here, because this is a UC application workshop, is the tag deadline. So for those of you who are going to be applying for tag, that application period was September 1st through the 30th. Now, do keep in mind UC San Diego, as well as UC Berkeley and UCLA do not participate in tag. So just keep that in mind. Although I'm mentioning tag, we do not accept tag applications. Although we don't accept tag applications, we still more than welcome our community college transfer students. In fact, over a third of our incoming class each year are transfer students. Now, once you've submitted your application by that November 30th deadline, you will then be next submitting your transfer academic update. Christina is going to go a lot more in depth about the TAU, as it's most commonly referred to, and what that's used for, but just know that the priority deadline to submit the transfer academic update is January 31st, and then the final deadline to submit your transfer academic update is going to be March 31st. Now, in terms of when admission decisions are going to be released, we typically release our decisions around the middle of April. Do keep in mind that all the UCs are going to vary when those transfer admission starts coming out. And when you do get your decision, you're going to have one of 3 possible outcomes. Of course, the most favorable outcome is that you were admitted to UC San Diego. Another potential outcome is that you were not admitted. And then a third potential outcome is going to be if you were waitlisted. And if it is the case that you do receive a waitlist offer, if you are interested in being on the waitlist, you'll need to make sure that you opt into our waitlist by the deadline or the deadline that is stated on your letter. And do keep in mind that waitlists can be very unpredictable in nature. So we do always encourage our applicants, if you are offered a waitlist decision, to go ahead and still accept offers from other schools you have. We don't want you putting everything in one basket there. And then for students who did receive an admission offer, June 1st is going to be the deadline for transfer students to accept their offer to one UC campus. And then one thing I always like to add, because a lot of students may not be familiar with this, just to keep in mind that any admission offer from any UC campus is technically provisional, which means it's not finalized until the summer once we receive all of your final documents that we need. And this is where we're going to end up finalizing your admission. So just keep that in mind. When you do accept your admission offer, you will sign a provisional contract for admission that's going to outline everything you need to do to maintain your admission, but technically you're not going to be finalized until the summer. But that's just our brief application timeline. So if we go to our next step, or our next slide, sorry, we want to first go over just a few tips for you before starting your application. So as I just mentioned, the application is due on November 30th, so you should start prepping for it now if you have not already. And so just some general tips that we like to share with our students. First, we always encourage our students to do their research. You hopefully have done your research by now. You know which UCs you want to apply for. We always encourage our students to apply broadly. Definitely make sure you're doing your research for all UC campuses. I know a lot of students get their heart set on certain UCs, but make sure you're not ruling out certain campuses. Make sure you are researching, again, every single campus. A lot of times students end up getting surprised that maybe UCs that weren't even on their radar maybe end up moving to the top of their list. So make sure you're doing your due diligence with all of that research. You want to make sure you're researching majors, student life, research opportunities, internships, graduate opportunities, and some additional things that I always recommend students research in regards to the admissions process. At each individual UC campus that you're considering, you want to make sure you're researching how does that campus review its applicants? How are majors assigned? The importance of major prep, what major prep is required, because remember, major prep is going to differ amongst all UC campuses, even if it's for the same major. What's the process for switching majors, impacted majors, stuff like that. I think it's really important for students to make sure that they're reaching out to each UC. A lot of times students can sometimes make the assumption that all the UCs do everything the same way because we're all part of the University of California. But just remember our application review process, major assignment, all of those things can be very different between each UC campus. And then some additional tips. Christina's going to be sharing some tips for filling out that awards and activities section later. But beforehand, we always like to recommend students to maybe create a document like a Google Doc of just summarizing all of your involvement that you've had while you're at your college. It's a nice way for you to have it all in one place. And that way make sure that when you are filling out your application, you're not forgetting anything. You're not having to go back and try to remember certain dates or maybe what specific roles you had. Hopefully you'll have all of that compiled into one place ahead of time. It'll make filling out your application a lot easier. And then the last little tidbit before we start your application, we just always recommend that you go ahead and get your unofficial transcripts from every institution that you've attended ready to go, whether it's printed out next to you on your phone, on your computer. You definitely want to make sure that you're not filling out your coursework from memory. And one other tidbit for any students who have attended other four-year institutions or other institutions outside of the California community colleges, you especially want to make sure that you have those unofficial transcripts. If you are currently attending California Community College, I know sometimes the colleges will translate coursework that you've had from other universities or colleges onto that transcript. But just remember, when you are applying to the UC system, you need to report the coursework from other institutions that you've attended directly as it appears on those transcripts. So now we'll go to our next slide. So those are just some tips to get you prepped for starting your application. So let's go ahead and start your application. So of course, the very first step in starting your UC application is going to be creating your account. So you all are very familiar with this. I'm sure we all have signed up for multiple accounts. So we know the drill about choosing an email and password. Of course, you want to make sure that you're using an email that you're going to have access to. I know a lot of students like to use their college emails, but you definitely, I recommend maybe using a personal email that you check regularly. If you're going to be leaving your community college, your email may disappear after that. Every college is going to be a little bit different. So what we don't want to happen is for you to apply using an email that you may not have access to, later on next spring or next summer. Also, as I mentioned before, making sure it's an email that you check regularly. I don't recommend using shared email accounts. I know sometimes students, if you maybe have siblings who also are in college, a family account. I've heard stories from students about family members checking an email, they forget to mention it to the student and the student ends up missing an important deadline. So just make sure it's an email account that you only have access to, that you check regularly. Of course, you're gonna have to make sure that your password matches all the requirements that's going to be outlined here on this screenshot. And then you also are going to be asked to create a secret question and answer combination. So again, we're probably all familiar with this. If you've signed up for Netflix or anything like that. We all have to do this, but you just want to make sure that you're keeping all this information in a safe place. And again, the biggest thing I really want to stress when you are creating your account is just make sure that you are checking your email. UCs, we use email to communicate with you critical time sensitive information. We also encourage you to make sure your filters are adjusted in your email account so that you're accepting all emails from any UC address. Especially for our transfer applicants. During the transfer application review process, a UC campus can email you. Maybe if they need an official document, if they need further clarification for something. So you don't want to miss those emails. I have had students before who those emails went straight to their spam and they didn't find it until 2 or 3 months after we had emailed them asking for an unofficial document. So just make sure you're getting all of that set up ahead of time as well. So once you're creating your account, we'll go on to our next slide here, and it's time to start beginning to fill out the application. So this screenshot here is going to show you all the different sections of the application. Now, when you're filling out the UC application, it does not matter which order you go in. However, you must start with the About You section. And you must start with this section simply because the application uses conditional logic, what's going to be used throughout the application. So this is going to help to determine whether you qualify for a fee waiver. It's also just going to help provide a little bit more context about you. But again, you can fill out the application in any order that you'd like. You just have to make sure that you are starting with that About You section. And then something else that's not mentioned here prior to when you're beginning your application, you are going to have to select the applicant type. So obviously you're in the transfer application workshop, you're applying as a transfer student. Know that UC San Diego, we only accept students in junior standing. So you need to make sure that first you are actually in junior standing. If you have any questions about that, you can reach out to our admissions office, but you want to make sure that you are selecting junior standing. And then also keep in mind that UC San Diego only offers fall entry. So the majority of the UCs only have fall start. I believe there's one that may offer spring or winter. But for us, just know that you only will be able to select the fall term. So if you are not at junior standing, or you're trying to select a different term that's not fall, it will not let you proceed with starting your application specifically to UC San Diego. So moving to our next slide here. So as I mentioned, you have to start with the About You section. So what is the About You section? Well, it's all about you. This is where you're going to provide information about you or your parent or legal guardian's education, income, and family size. And as I mentioned previously, this information is really just used to provide more context about your home environment and to determine if you are going to be eligible for a fee waiver. So again, this is the section that you must start with. And then once you've completed this section, every other section, you can go however order you'd like. I always recommend maybe starting with the sections that you that require a little bit more detail. So filling out the coursework, maybe your activities, but again, it's totally up to you. Take your time with going through those sections and just know that you have to start with that About You section. So we're going to go to our next slide here, and this is just going to go over the major section. So it's time to select your major. And again, this is not the specific order that you must follow. So on the UC application, the default view to select your major is going to be grouping the majors by colleges. Now, keep in mind here at UC San Diego, we don't group our majors by colleges. Our majors are housed by schools, and that's because our college system is something that's a little bit different than most traditional universities. And I'll be touching on that in just a little bit. But again, the default category to view the majors is going to be by college. However, if maybe you're having a difficult time finding your major in this category view, you can also switch to category view. Now, if you do select the category view, it is possible for a major to appear in multiple locations. So biochemistry is a perfect example of this. If you choose that category view, it may display in both the biological and life sciences as well as the physical sciences. This was all done to make sure that it's easier for you to find your major. So as long as you're making sure that the major you're selecting is actually matching the name of the major you were choosing or intending to choose on that application, you'll be good to go. And then on the UC application, you do have the option to select an alternate major, but keep in mind that alternate majors may not be available at every campus. So if you do choose an alternate major, if a campus is not able to offer you placement in your first choice major, they may consider you for your alternate major. And I really want to emphasize the may, because this is definitely something that's going to vary across all the UCs. So if you do choose an alternate major, make sure you're choosing something that you actually would be happy with studying. I've seen students who pick an alternate major that they have absolutely no interest in. They just want to pick it just in case they don't get into their first choice major. But we also don't want you picking something that, again, you have no interest in studying, because that's not going to be a very fun experience for you as well. And again, It's really important to note that not all campuses will consider students for their alternate major. And some campuses also have restrictions on changing their major or changing your major once you've been admitted. So that's why I say this is all great information for you to research ahead of time. We don't want students picking an alternate major, thinking I'll just get admitted into this major, then come switch into the major that I really wanted once I actually begin at the UC, because UCs, especially sometimes for our transfer students, may have different restrictions on being able to switch into majors. Here at UC San Diego, you definitely can switch or choose an alternate major. And we always recommend that our students choose an uncapped major. However, that's a personal choice. It's up to you. But one thing I really want to stress, and this is going to be specific for UC San Diego, is that we cannot offer our transfer students undeclared admission. So what that means is if you do not choose an alternate major, or let's say, for example, you chose 2 capped majors and you didn't get into those, we do not have the option to consider you for undeclared admission. So really make sure that you're strategically choosing your majors, picking something that you're interested in studying. But again, just remember, if you only pick one major, if you don't get into that major and you have nothing selected as an alternate major, we cannot offer you that undeclared admission. So that's just something that you want to keep in mind specifically for UC San Diego when you're selecting your majors. Now going on to our next slide here, as I mentioned, I was going to get to this point. This is always my favorite thing to talk about, and that's our college system. So I won't do an in-depth overview of the college system just because we don't have too much time for that. We could spend the rest of this session talking about our colleges. So if you are unfamiliar with how the UC San Diego college system works, maybe you need a refresher, you have some questions, I highly encourage you to schedule maybe a virtual one-on-one advising appointment. I know we have a couple of recordings on our YouTube admissions channel that talks about the college system, or you could even attend one of our virtual information sessions. I'll have some of my colleagues send those links to you in the chat, but definitely make sure before you even get to this section that you have a good understanding of the college system and how it works. But to give you a very brief overview of the college system, UC San Diego, we are made up of 7 different colleges. I always like to tell our students, you can almost replace the word college with community. So we have 7 different communities on our campus, and all of our admitted students are going to be assigned to one of these 7 colleges. Now, there's a lot of things that make our colleges unique from each other. One of the main things is that each of our colleges have their own personality. They have their own theme, and those themes are going to be rooted in different philosophies. And then the other main thing about our colleges that makes them different from each other is that each college has its own distinct GE curriculum. So I'm going to ask in the chat to have one of my colleagues send our transfer GE chart. That way you can get a better sense of kind of what that looks like. But each of our colleges do have their own GE curriculum. Now, I know a majority of you are attending a California community college, and it's very popular for our students to do pursue IGETC. So just know that for all of our colleges except for Revelle College, and I'll say that again, with the exception of Revelle, if you are fully IGETC certified, your IGETC certification will clear all of the lower division GE requirements for all of our colleges, again, except for Revelle. If you're not IGETC certified, or maybe you're partially IGETC certified, you can still clear your GEs. You'll just have to wait for your coursework to be reviewed by your college advisor. They will be the ones to determine if you've satisfied all of your GE areas, and if not, what areas you still need to satisfy. But again, for full IGETC certified students, your IGETC certification clears all of those lower division GEs for all of our colleges except for Revelle. Now, if you're not sure if you're IGETC certified, or if you're on track for being IGETC certified, just know that IGETC certification does come directly from the California Community College. So if you're unsure, definitely recommend going and reaching out to your community college counselor. They'll be able to let you know if you're on track for IGETC certification, if you're maybe missing a couple of courses, what that might look like. But just know that that certification is going to have to be awarded from your community college. So UC San Diego, we have nothing to do with awarding your IGETC certification. But going back to our colleges, I think the most important thing for you all to remember about our college system is that our colleges are not tied to any major. So this means whatever major you want to study, it can be done in any of our 7 colleges. A lot of times students ask, I'm a prospective biology major, I'm a prospective psychology major. What college is best for my major? And I always tell students, any of our colleges can accommodate any major. So if you're wondering how to pick out the colleges, which ones might be best for you, definitely recommend just, again, researching those philosophies. It's kind of the same thing as the Sorting Hat for all the Harry Potter fans in the audience. Looking at the GE curriculum, you can even just look at the map to see where all the colleges are located. But these are all things that are going to help you narrow down which colleges might be at the top of your list. And then if you are wondering how we determine which college you're going to be assigned to if you are admitted, We're going to use your college rankings, which is why we're talking about this on the application, because something that is unique to the UC San Diego application is that you are going to be asked to rank the colleges 1 through 7. Now, the college rankings have no impact on your admission chances. We don't even look at those until after you've been admitted. So you really want to make sure that you're ranking the colleges in order of your preference in order to have the best chance of being assigned to the college that you want. So when you get to this section on the application, there's actually going to be a pop-up that's going to ask that you have acknowledged that you've researched, that you know about our college system. There'll be some links in there in case you don't, but you actually won't even begin to start being able to rearrange the colleges until you've agreed, hey, I've read up on the college system, I understand it. And if you do have more questions, again, there will be some links there so you can learn more. But before you even get to this section, again, if you're confused about the college system, please reach out to us. I never want students to blindly rank the colleges, having no idea how this works. So make sure you have all that information. But once you do, check off that little pop-up box. The screenshot that you see here is the default order for how the colleges are ranked. So if you do not rearrange these colleges, this is what we're going to assume is your college ranking. So do your research, make sure you're happy with your college rankings, and just know that this is something that's going to be unique to the UC San Diego application. And again, just really stressing the importance of researching the colleges and how they work. I think Christina can probably confirm every year we get students who are admitted and they always tell us, I didn't really understand what this was. I didn't think it was too important. So we do use your rankings to determine your college assignment, and we do our best to get you within your top rankings. So moving to our next slide here, we're going to get into a little bit more information that's specific for the transfer application process. And I'm so sorry, I have this weird glare. My windows always have this light shining through at this time of the day. So first, we're going to start with the Transfer Academic Planner, or the TAP account as it's most commonly referred to. So the TAP account, it's a great way for you to make sure you're on track for getting ready to transfer to a UC. It's also very beneficial for you for the application process. So if you don't have a TAP account, I highly encourage you to create one. I've met a lot of students this year who've never even heard of the TAP account. So I'll go ahead and ask another one of my colleagues to send in the chat the link for creating a TAP account. But the TAP account is basically where you are going to be able to provide all your academic history. You're going to list all the courses you've completed, the grades, the units, the institutions that you've attended, what courses you're currently enrolled in for this fall term, what you have planned for the spring. And for the prospective students who aren't ready to apply, the benefit for that is that admission officers, we can access your TAP account. So we can just help to determine if you're on track for meeting major prep, units, anything else that you might have questions on. But for those of you who are applying right now, one of the other main benefits of having a TAP account is that it can make filling out your academic history or your coursework on the application a lot easier. So for any applicants who have already created a UC TAP account and you've already entered in all your coursework, everything's up to date, there actually is a feature in the admission application that allows students to import your courses and grades. So again, I think this is going to make it a lot easier. You don't need to type in everything twice. So if you do have a TAP account, you need to make sure that the email that you're using to create your admission application matches that what's on your TAP account. But basically, if you already have that TAP account, it's up to date. Every morning, the information is going to be updated from any previous day's data. So let's say today you go and create your TAP account, you get all your coursework entered in. By tomorrow, you'll be able to actually directly import all your courses that you've entered into your TAP account into the application. So that's why I say it's a really beneficial tool, whether you're not applying for fall 2022 or you are, to go ahead and get that TAP account created. Now, once you do import your TAP academic record into the application, any further information that you change is going to have to be made directly into the UC application. So again, let's say you create your TAP account today, you import it tomorrow, and then you realize you accidentally left off a course, or maybe you're going to be changing your spring schedule. At that point, you would have to make all those changes directly in the UC application. But otherwise, I highly encourage everyone to create the TAP account. Even if you're already applying for fall 2022, we can still go in and look at your TAP account. It's just a great way for you to make sure you've got all your I's dotted, T's crossed, to make sure you're ready for preparing to transfer to the UC. So we finished with our TAP account. I'm going to move on to our next slide here. And now we're going to talk about listing your colleges that you've attended. So I want to stress this. You must report coursework from every institution that you've attended. This also includes four-year institutions, not just community colleges. This includes universities or colleges that are outside of the US. It doesn't matter if it was a university that you attended 15 years ago. It doesn't matter if maybe you only attended that college while you were in high school. I know a lot of students do dual enrollment, then they leave high school and then they go start at another community college. You need to report that coursework. If all the coursework that you took is no longer relevant to your major, it doesn't matter. You must report coursework from every institution that you've attended. I know it's very cheesy, but I always tell transfer students, my motto is when in doubt, list it out. List all those institutions. If you're not sure if it's accredited, if you're not sure if you should list it, go ahead and list it, because when we're reviewing our application, we'll be able to determine, whether an institution is credited, whether you needed those coursework or not. We can always ask for documents, unofficial transcripts. But what we don't want to happen is for you to leave off an institution that you probably did need to report. And it might not have even been intentional. So again, make sure that you are listing every institution that you have attended. So when you do get to this section of the application where you're finding your colleges, you can search for your school by its name, its location, or its college code. And then once you've selected your school, all the school information should appear in a table for your review and editing. So you should be able to review the grading codes, the grading scale, the grading options, location, all that good stuff. So you'll double check that to make sure everything matches the information for that college or that institution that you specifically are listing. And then once you've verified all that information is correct, you're going to go ahead and select your dates of attendance. So when you are listing your dates of attendance, you need to make sure that you list them consecutively, even if you had an enrollment gap. So let's say you started at your community college fall 2019, you did fall 2019, spring 2020, then you took a year-long gap, and then you came back for fall 2021. You're still going to include that all as one consecutive date of attendance. So you don't need to stop when you've had a gap. I'll talk about gaps in a little bit as well. So just make sure that you are listing all of those dates consecutively. What else on this section? Again, you're going to double check to make sure that the grading system is correct. Another important thing about this section, you want to make sure that you are double checking that the term is correct. So I know for California community colleges, every community college in California except for 3 are on the semester system, but you do want to make sure that you're paying attention to that. So if you are attending De Anza, Foothill, or Lake Tahoe Community College that are on the quarter system, make sure that you do have quarters selected as the term, because that can potentially mess up your units if you accidentally go ahead and select the semester section. And then on this section as well, I know if you've attended 4 years, there are some 4 years that have switched from the semester to the quarter, from the quarter to the semester. You do have the option to also indicate whether or not your institution has changed. So I know there are a couple of the CSUs, for example, that went from quarter to semester. So you also will have the option on this section to go ahead and indicate that information there. So moving on to our next section here. So this is where you're going to confirm all of your college information. So here's where you're going to double check to make sure that all of your dates of attendance match. It should list all the exact semesters or quarters that you were attending. You're going to double check the name, the term, the grading system. You'll hear us say this a lot, double, triple, if not quadruple check everything. So just want to make sure that everything is reported accurately. And then if we move on to our next slide, it's now time for you to enter in your coursework. So this is the fun part of the application. So this is why we really stress having that unofficial transcript, again, either if it's physically right next to you or on your computer, but essentially your academic history should be an exact replica of your transcript. So let's first start for our students who are attending a California community college. The UC application automatically recognizes all transferable coursework from the ASSIST database. So it's going to be a little bit easier for California community college coursework. Essentially, you're going to be able to start, you'll be in your community college. So in this example that you see here on the screenshot, this student's going to be reporting their coursework from Irvine Valley College. So when they go to that specific department and they expand that department, it's going to show all transferable courses that are available at Irvine Valley College, specifically in that department. And so that's how you will begin going and listing all your coursework. You're going to start and doing that in consecutive order as well. So if you started at Irvine Valley College in this example, let's say fall 19, you're going to start with your transcript at fall 19 and go directly how all those courses appear on your transcript, expand those departments, select that course, and then you're going to select the grade. Because ASSIST, again, the system automatically recognizes ASSIST database, all the units and everything should populate, but that also is something that you want to make sure you're paying extra close attention to, not only making sure that you're reporting the department code correctly, but also just making sure that those units are populating correctly, the course number, the course title, Again, your coursework should really be an exact replica of your unofficial transcript. Now, if you're not a California community college student or you've attended other institutions outside of the California community college system, the UC system does not have transferable course lists for other institutions. So you will need to manually enter your coursework. So if you are going to manually enter your coursework, you want to make sure that you really are taking the time to replicate your unofficial transcript. I've seen sometimes students change the titles of courses because they think we may not be familiar with that title. Even if your school uses a unique grading system, I know I've seen universities that assign unique letters for grades, not the standard A through F. I've seen number grades. That is completely okay. Remember, we're trained to know how to evaluate this. We can always reach out to you if you have questions. So make sure you really are exactly replicating that transcript, especially if you're going to be entering all your coursework in manually. So again, if you've attended a California community college, the assist database automatically is going to be recognized by the UC application. It should be very easy for you selecting your coursework. If not, you'll need to manually enter everything and just make sure that you are triple checking that the units, department title, course title, codes, all of that stuff matches your transcript. And then for both California community college students or non-California community college students, the main thing that I really want to stress is that you must enter in all your courses, even if you don't believe they're transferable, even if you don't want them for credit, if you believe they're old grades, if you don't think that they are reflective of your abilities, you must repeat or list all coursework that you have completed. You also must report all courses that you have withdrawn from if you've received academic renewal or even incomplete grades. And I know a lot of times students are really afraid to list those withdrawn courses, but I have talked to many of colleagues within my office as well as other UCs, and we're all in agreement that withdrawals do not have nearly as big as an impact as a lot of students think they do. So it's really important for you to list those withdrawn courses, especially it's not uncommon that we see students who withdrew from an entire term. If you leave off all those courses, the application is probably going to recognize that term as a gap because you have nothing listed there. So don't be afraid to list your withdrawals. Academic renewal, just make sure that it is an actual academic renewal. Keep in mind that repeating a course is not the same thing as academic renewal. You will know if you have academic renewal because it will be notated on your transcript. You also are going to have to go through some type of petition or process to get that academic renewal granted at your community college. So again, just make sure that you are listing everything. And it's really important because, as I mentioned earlier, all admission offers from a UC campus are provisional. In the summer, when we get your final transcript, we're going to make sure that everything you listed on your application matches what's on your transcript. And if there are any discrepancies, it can potentially lead to cancellation of admission. And I don't say this to scare students, but just to really stress the importance of why you want to make sure your academic history is an exact replica of that transcript. So again, do not be afraid to list those withdrawn courses, those academic renewals. Don't leave off courses because you don't think it's important or you don't think that we want to see it. List everything. If we have further questions, we'll go ahead and take care of the rest. And then moving to our next slide here. So we just finished listing all of our coursework. So now we're going to go into terms attended. So this is again where you're going to confirm what terms you were enrolled in at your college. And then if there are any gaps in your attendance, the application is going to ask for you to explain your gaps. So if you are being prompted, if you do see that there's a gap and you think it's a mistake, you're going to want to make sure you go back to confirm all your dates of attendance. Again, for example, maybe you left off that term or you withdrew from all your courses. As an example, that's going to be recognized as a gap. So just if you know you didn't have a gap, make sure you go back, confirm all your terms of enrollment, make sure all your courses are listed properly. And then if we move on to our next slide here, this is just going to be a little bit information for students who have had those gaps. So if you have had a gap, you will need to provide an explanation. And do not be afraid of listing gaps. I feel like next to withdrawals, gaps are going to be the next thing that students are just really nervous about us seeing on their application. But just remember, we understand life happens. You're busy. You have other things going on outside of college. So sometimes you have to take a break. You have to take a pause. Just know when we're asking for an explanation of your gap, we're really just using this to make sure that you were not enrolled in any other coursework during that gap period. So you don't need to provide us a very long explanation of your gap. We just need enough information to confirm that you weren't enrolled in courses. But on the other side of the token, we also don't want you to provide a very vague gap. So if you just say, I wasn't in class, we're probably going to end up asking you for more information. So we do need a little extra info there, but it doesn't have to be a long paragraph. But just remember, for the gaps, we're just really trying to make sure that you weren't enrolled in any other courses during this time. So don't be afraid to provide those gap explanations. Again, it's I think a lot more common than students realize for those gaps to happen. And as I mentioned, we know life happens. All kinds of things can impact you taking gaps. That's why we want to provide you the opportunity to provide the explanation, so we don't just assume that you just left that blank and we had to ask you for that extra info. And so going on to our next slide here. So I just going to go a little bit of information about selecting your UCE and UCM. So as I'm sure many of you are aware of, as part of the 7-course pattern, you're going to need to complete 2 transferable English composition courses and 1 transferable mathematics course. So this is a section of the application where you're going to indicate the completion status of each of these requirements. So do keep in mind, all transfer applicants, you will have until the end of the spring term prior to transferring to complete your admission requirements. So you will have until the end of spring 2022 to finish your 7-course pattern. So on this section, as you can see, this is where you're going to indicate the progress of your UCE and UCM. So you'll indicate whether you've already completed it with a letter grade of C or better, if it's in progress, if you have it planned, or if it's not planned. So make sure again that you're taking your time with this section. We don't want you to accidentally click that you haven't taken a UCE when you have, because then that means you're not meeting the requirements. And then moving on to our next slide here. So we're going to touch base on our additional academics comment section. So after you've filled out all your academic history, there is going to be this box where you can provide additional academic comments. Now, a lot of students sometimes get confused on what they're supposed to put in this box. But one thing I want to start off with saying is you are not required to put anything in here. And if you don't have any information, it will not in any way, shape, or form negatively impact your application. I know sometimes when you're filling stuff out and something says it's optional, we automatically feel like optional means required. But really, this box is just for you to provide any additional information or context that you think we need to know when we're reviewing your academics. So for example, I've seen students who maybe they've attended another institution that had a unique curriculum or grading system. Sometimes they'll provide us with the grading rubric or information to that transcript code. I've seen students who, if they're maybe something impacted their academics, but they don't want to talk about it in their PIQs. Maybe they experienced medical complications, or they were moving, something that, again, that impacted their academics, but they don't want to go fully in depth in a PIQ about that. They'll talk about that in the additional academic comment section. Sometimes students will go further in depth about their gaps. I've seen that here. Another thing that you can use this section for, as I mentioned with academic renewal, you do have to get that approved by your community college before you can actually report that academic renewal grade in your academic history. So if you're maybe in the process of trying to get your academic renewal approved, you can go ahead and put in that comment section that you are in the process of that. That way we're aware of that. And then we may be able to ask you later on to confirm if that academic renewal has been approved prior to finishing the review of your application. But again, I just want to stress that you don't have to fill something out here. This is just for us to get more information, to clarify anything, to help us better understand your academics. So you don't need to use this as an opportunity to write a 5th PIQ or post your resume or your Instagram or YouTube recordings. This really is just meant for you to provide anything if you think it is necessary for us to better understand your academics. So with that being said, we're now going to transition. I'm going to pass things over to my lovely colleague, Christina, and she'll finish going through the application with you all.
Thank you so much, Taylor, and welcome everybody. My name is Christina Sandoval-Paquette. I'm an admissions officer and international specialist here at UC San Diego. I was also a transfer student myself, and going through this walkthrough right now brings out so many memories of having to fill out this application myself as I transfer to my UC. If you are in the Rio Hondo, Cerrito College, Mount San Jacinto, or LA City college student, hello, my name is Christina. I'm your AO. As you heard Taylor mention earlier, her community colleges, know that we do have an admissions officer assigned to all of our California community colleges. So if you are a California community college student and you want to know who your AO is, I always tell students just to email us at admissions reply, and we'd be more than happy to tell you who your admissions officer is. But let's talk about activities and awards. So we talked a little bit about getting started on your application. We talked about majors, we talked about the college system, and then we talked a little bit about how to report your academic history. Now we get to that later half of the application when we start talking about activities and awards. I hope that while you were at a California community college, you took advantage of all the resources that they had to offer and were involved even while you're at a California community college. One thing that I find is that many transfer students suffer from what I call the Rapunzel syndrome, where they're sitting there and they're waiting and they're hoping and they're just like, my life will begin the moment I transfer out of here. But the reality is that your college experience really does begin the moment you start taking coursework and start putting yourself on the transfer pathway. And so when you're doing the application, we are going to be asking you for what did you do outside of classwork? In addition, to help you get prepared for taking upper division coursework here at UC San Diego or in the UC system. So you'll have an opportunity to list any activities, any involvement in student organizations and clubs you might have taken, internship, research opportunities. I am so happy to see so many more community colleges offering research opportunities for their transfer students, any educational preparation program that you might have been involved in, as well as any work experience or internships you might have held. So you'll be able to list that information here. Give us a brief description of what you did in that club organization or internship, job, research opportunity, anything that you're going to be listing, and then how many hours per week and how many weeks per year you participated in that. In our next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about, sorry, I had to tell my kids to keep it down. In our next slide, we talk about scholarships. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind is that your UC application is not only an application for admittance into our campuses, but it's also a scholarship application. And so when you're doing your application, I know a lot of transfer students put emphasis on that academic portion and just kind of like backslide a little bit on activities and awards and the PIQs. But keep in mind that everything that you're listing on your application is and can be utilized to identify who we're going to be giving scholarships to. So we're going to give you the opportunity to first self-identify what scholarships you would like to be considered for. And then the campuses individually will decide, which scholarships do we have available and who's going to get those scholarships. So this section is the scholarships that we as a university have to give to you. You self-identify. We use all the information you put on your application to review you for these scholarships. And then our financial aid department actually decides who gets what. And then if our next slide, oh, and one thing about scholarships really quickly before I forget, your California community colleges also have scholarships to give you. Please don't forget to check your California community colleges. I sat on a board for a scholarship at a California community college worth $10,000, and there were years where no one applied. So please, please, please check your California community colleges and don't be afraid of those big numbers, those 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 scholarships. Always apply. You never actually know what you're going to get. Okay. PIQs, I mentioned earlier that when they're reviewing for the scholarships, they're looking at everything, including the PIQs. Now, I did see in the Q&A just a second ago, a question from a student saying, do I need to answer all 4 PIQ questions or do I only need to answer the one that's mandatory? Now, as a student mentioned, there's one that's mandatory, and that PIQ question revolves around what have you done to prepare for yourself for your major? And really, we just want to know more about what you've done to prepare yourself for not only your major, but really to be ready to take upper division level coursework. Aside from that, you are then going to get to choose 3 questions out of the 7 remaining questions that are on there, right? Because they're 8. No, they're 7. So 6 remaining questions that are on there. Choose the one that you think you can speak the most to. That's typically what I tell my students. Transfer students, you guys tend to really understand the point of the personal insight question, which is a question that we want a response to. Note that there is a maximum of 350 words. There are no word minimums, so you do not need to use all 350 words. There is a character minimum of 1. So do you need to respond all 4? Yes, because we're going to ask you to at least put 1 character for all the PIQs. Now, please don't do that unless you can really answer a question with 1 character. I really want you to be thoughtful in this process because, again, your application is not only for admittance, but it's also utilized for scholarships. And of course, everything that you put on your application can be utilized to review you for selection for our campuses. So, I do want you to be thoughtful about those PIQs and really choose the ones that are going to be the best fit for you. There is not one PIQ question that weighs more than the other, or that we're going to see highly, or that we want to see more than the other. They all carry the same weight. One of the questions that we get on our Instagram page every single week is, what is our number one tip for answering those PIQs? By the way, if you've been sending us instant messages on Instagram, we are reading those, and we do try to respond to some of them every now and then. But one of the one that keeps coming up is tips for PIQs. My number one tip for you guys is to go and download the PIQ guide. Now, I'm going to have one of my colleagues put it in the chat for you guys to look at. Please, if you're having a struggle answering these PIQs, download it, read through it. It's a writing exercise aimed to help jumpstart the writing process for you. And it also breaks down the question a little bit more, so you have a better understanding of why we're asking the question. So PIQ guide, my number one tip. On our next slide, we're going to look at the submission process. Oh, additional comments, that's right. If you have any additional comments that you would like to add, you can go ahead and put them in the personal insight additional comments. This is not a space for you to write a 5th PIQ or to continue to write more than 350 characters for your PIQs that you're already being asked to write. This is really just a space for you to tell us anything else that you want us to know that maybe you didn't get to cover in any of the PIQs, or it's not going to be abundantly clear. Some of the things that I've seen in here in the past are going to be circumstances, family circumstances, unusual personal circumstances that you might have. Keep note that we do read everything that you put on your application. I'm always reading the insight questions, and I'm always reading these comments. It really just helps provide more insight to me. So be thoughtful in this section, be clear, be concise. Don't use it as a 5th PIQ though, all right? Don't write too much. All right. Now we're going to start the review process. So you've gone through it, you started your application, you put in your personal information, you selected your campuses and your major, you ranked the colleges, you've listed your entire academic history, you have now listed your activities and awards, you've identified the scholarships, you answered the PIQs, and then you get to this section. If at any section is incomplete, it's going to tell you. So if you look on here on the far right hand side, they have those little circles with the check marks. Those are the sections that are completed in full. If you see one section that's not circled with a check mark, that means that that section is incomplete, and you need to go back and see what is not completed before you can actually submit your application. And our next slide, we'll get to see what that kind of looks like. One of the sections that often goes unanswered, or students always forget to do and they have to go back and answer, is that gap in education. But if you go into that little drop down, you click on the section that is missing, it'll take you directly to the section that's missing. This academic review, gaps in education, is the one that kind of pops up frequently. I was reading in the Q&A and I did see a student ask about, how can I explain my gap in education? Be brief. If you're active military and you were on active duty and that's why you didn't take coursework, just say that. That's all you got to say. Nothing too crazy. I see often that students put in, I was expecting a child, or I had a child and I decided that I was to take, a semester off, a year off, 5 years off, 10 years off, however long you're going to be taking off to be a full-time mom. That's completely fine. You don't need to write any more than that. That's more than enough. Sometimes I see students write, I needed to work full time. I did not have time to take courses during that semester, so I didn't take anything. Completely fine. So just be brief in those gaps in education. You don't need to give a lengthy explanation, but if you want to, you can always use either the personal comment section or utilize one of the PIQs to explain that gap if you want to. In our next slide, we'll talk a little bit about billing and summary and the fee waivers. One of the questions that we do get asked quite frequently is who's eligible for a fee waiver. This information is available on the University of California Office of the President's website, but students who are eligible for a fee waiver are going to be California residents, permanent residents, students who qualify for AB 540. These are students who went to high school at least for 3 years in the state of California. And then they also need to meet a need, a funding need. So if you're one of those students, know that you will most likely qualify for a fee waiver. If you're qualifying for a fee waiver through another means, like maybe you're qualifying through NACAC, you're going to want to pay by check and then submit your fee waiver. But other than that, you will get a nice rundown. You'll be able to say, yes, I want to utilize my fee waiver to waive me out of 4 applications. If you qualify for a fee waiver, you want to apply for 5 campuses, you'll need to pay for that 5th campus. $70 for resident US citizens, $80 per application for those of you who are international non-immigrant status. But then at the end, I'll give you a total and then you'll hit pay. You pay by card, you could pay by check, however you see fit. In our next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about releasing authorization and statement of integrity. Please, 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 before you sign this, read the entirety of this document. It is absolutely important in just about anything that you read the entirety before you sign, even if it's an electronic signature. You want to make sure that you fully understand what you are doing and what you're submitting. The academic integrity, that integrity statement is extremely crucial to us. And we want to make sure that you fully understand what that means. The authorization side, please check and see that. One of the authorizations is going to be asking you about is, can we talk to a counselor on your behalf? And can we, disclose specific information, or can they disclose specific information about you to us? So please make sure that you're reading the entirety before you do anything. It's absolutely crucial that you understand what you're doing. All right, and then our next slide. You are done. Hooray. You checked all the marks. You've done everything. You've paid. You've clicked the statement of integrity. You've told us who's going to authorize, who's being authorized to review your stuff. Awesome. Now, this is the important part that I always tell students to do. Print this page out, print a receipt, and then go to view and print your application and print a copy of your application, staple it on the corner, keep it in a folder next to your desk. I always tell students to keep the receipts. Always keep the receipts so that you know exactly what you submitted, what you put in your application. If we have any questions and we contact you, you can always refer back to that copy of your application and be like, oh yes, I see what they mean. Okay, let me answer this question really quickly. So just keep a copy of your application. I always tell students to do that. Next slide is going to be about TAU. Taylor talked about the transfer academic update. I saw a couple of questions in the Q&A about it. One of the questions was, what if I was supposed to take something during winter intersession and I decided to take it in spring? How do I notify you guys about that? You do it through the TAU. Now, I understand that some of you are on the quarter system and you're, taking winter quarter classes. Maybe you're doing winter intersession courses. Don't wait until your winter intersession classes are over for you to report anything on your TAU. The soon as your fall grades come out, you want to go into the TAU and update us on what those fall grades are. Without that information, without your fall grades, I cannot move forward on your application. I need that information in front of me before I fully review your entire application. So the TAU is absolutely crucial that you do. So don't forget that after January 1st, the TAU is going to be opening, and that's when you're going to tell us what your fall grades are. And that's the GPA that we're going to be using when we're evaluating your application. So it's absolutely crucial that you do it. You can always go back in and update us on your winter intersession if you'd like to. And then you can always go back in if your spring changes and you can update us on what your spring is going to look like. I know that it's kind of hard to predict the future, to know exactly what you're going to take in spring because the schedule can change, but try to do your best. And if you decided that you're not going to take any spring, it's also going to allow you to put some additional information like, I decided not to take anything in spring. Perfect. That's all I needed to know. All right. Now, say you run into an issue and you have questions. Of course, we are always here to help you. We're always here to answer any question you might have about the application. There are hundreds of well-meaning people on Instagram, on Facebook, on Reddit, on College Confidential that are always saying, hey, I'm more than happy to help you fill out your application, or pay me and I'll do your application for you. We're here to help you. This is our job. We're nothing more that we would love to do than to help answer any questions you might have on the applications. Those are some really well-meaning people, but when it comes to getting accurate advice, accurate answers, we always tell you to contact us, or if we're not available, contact the UC Application Center. They are going to be open on the following dates, and some of those are holiday dates, so just kind of keep that in mind. All right, that's it for me, guys. I know we got about 5 more minutes, but we're going to transition to a Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Christina and Taylor, for this very thorough and easy to understand presentation. It's been very helpful. You covered so much information today. Let's take some time to answer some questions. We have about 4 or 5 minutes for questions. And there was a question that came in. We have one question that's in the queue, actually, that I was hoping you could address. And the question talks about, what if I have more than 90 semester units? Would I have to be considered a senior transfer level? And this ties into an earlier question we had from a student who said they're unable to select San Diego as one of their campus choices, and perhaps that has something to do with their campus level. If, excuse me, Taylor, if you could address that question, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, great question. So this will be a multi-part answer. And I think I'll start by asking if someone in the chat can possibly send a link that kind of explains the UC lower division maximum credit, I'm butchering that name, policy limit, but essentially the UC system for all transfer applicants, if we're going to lower all of your lower division transferable units to 70 semester units. So in this case, let's say the student has completed 90 semester units. If you've only attended a community college, you will never reach senior standing. So even though you've completed 90 units, we're going to reduce that down to 70. Now you will still get subject credit for all your transferable coursework. So if you end up needing a course for your GEs or for a major requirement, you can still use that, but we're going to reduce those units down to 70. Which in, I'd say the majority of the cases, we typically do get a lot of our community college transfer students who choose that senior standing because they think I have those 90 semester units, I'm at senior level, but just know that we cap that down to 70. The only time a student can potentially be at senior standing is if you have coursework coming in from either another UC or another four-year institution. And without getting too much in the nuts and bolts of that, that's going to have to do more with your combination of lower division and upper division coursework. So again, if you've only ever attended a community college, you are for sure at junior standing. You will never reach senior standing. So you don't want to make sure that you're reaching that senior standing, even though or clicking senior standing on the application, even though you're at that 90 units, because technically that's going to get reduced down to 70. If you do have more questions about that, schedule those advising appointments, especially again, if you've attended another four-year institution, because then we really have to do a little bit more digging there to figure out what level you're at. But if you've only ever attended a community college, or you know for sure you only have completed lower division coursework, then you will choose junior standing because you're going to get dropped down to that 70. That was a really long answer. Sorry.
That was a really helpful answer. So thank you very much, Taylor. You know, we only have time for we have 2 minutes left, and there have been so many great questions. And thank you, Taylor and Christina, for all this helpful information. I think the final question is, and it's an important question, but perhaps in 2 minutes, Christina, can you talk about major preparation? The question is, should the student complete all the strongly recommended courses listed in assist or on assist for their major, and does it affect their application? I know we have a short period of time, but maybe you can share some words of wisdom.
Yeah, the first thing I'm going to say is go to our major prep site. First and foremost, those are the courses that we're going to be looking for in admission. So when I'm reviewing your application, there's 4 things I'm looking for. First is 60 units, second, 7 course pattern, third, GPA, and the fourth one is if you're one of those majors that requires major prep, I'm going to be looking for those major prep courses that are listed on the admissions page on our webpage, not on assist. So come to our page first and foremost. Secondly, if you completed the recommended, what it's going to allow you to do is move forward in your curriculum a little bit faster. So completing both the required and the recommended courses means that it kind of will allow you to graduate in a more timely fashion. If you don't do them, you can still possibly graduate in 2 years, but then you might be looking at taking some additional courses in the normal quarters and possibly looking to extend your time here in the summer. So you'll have to take coursework in the summer to finish within the 2. So it always kind of depends on the major, But if you wanted more insight, you can always book an appointment with one of us, and we'd be more than happy to explain that for you in particular and for the major that you're specifically applying for.
Great. Thank you so much, Christina. We really appreciate that. And yes, we are just about out of time. So I'd like to close this session by, first of all, thanking again all of our admissions team behind the scenes, and especially Taylor and Christina for all this helpful information. These are good questions, and you can contact us if you have additional questions. You can see the information that's available on this screen. UC San Diego's Office of Admissions contact information is listed, and we encourage you to take a screenshot for easy access. You can find our email address also at admissionsreply@ucsd.edu. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and we hope to see you over the next few days during future Triton Week. Best of luck with your application. Take care and go Tritons.